Hi, I watched a video this morning by, oh god, there's the dog. Um, I watched a video this morning by Brené Brown, and she was talking about compassion and boundaries and the necessity for boundaries. A lot of the time, people will say, well, I don't really know what my boundary is. I don't, well, actually, you do know, you just haven't identified it consciously, right? You know when you feel uncomfortable. You know when someone has kind of, when your back goes up, someone will say something or do something, and you'll be like, I don't like that very much. Actually, that is then where your boundary is, right? That is where your boundary ought to be, should I say. Everybody's boundary lines are different. Not everyone has the same boundary. So it's important that you communicate to people what your boundary actually is, right? So where is your boundary when it comes to your physicality? Where is your boundary when it comes to your spirituality? Where is your boundary when it comes to your emotions? Where is your boundary, when it comes to your mind? Where's the boundary? What is it that happens that makes you know, or helps you identify, if you like, where that boundary is? It's important to keep your boundary, and I think it's really, really important, because if you don't, you're not hanging on to your center. You're not keeping your center stable and looked after and caring for self. And caring for others only starts when you begin to care for yourself. I look down because I have a habit of staring and playing with my pen, so I kind of have a habit of looking down, so that's just so you know, bear with me. Until you identify your limits and you can communicate your limits to people, you will be imposed on. Right? You will be imposed on by other people's values, other people's expectations, and it will just keep piling on. And it doesn't stop, it just keeps going. It keeps piling, and that's when people often crack. Right? And that cracking can either be some kind of breakdown, or it can be yelling or shouting or just kind of an aggression, and it's like, oh, I don't like that. And it's key. That's why it's so important to communicate where your boundary is, especially at work. Because if you don't, then you will be taken advantage of. But there's often this guilt and this fear and this worry of not being accepted, or that you'll be rejected for some reason if you set a boundary. And I'll give you an example of a boundary, actually. When I first started working, set the boundary of I would not accept work calls at the weekends. And I uphold that boundary, because unless there are exceptions to the rule, of course. There's always an exception. But I set the boundary at, I'm not going to accept work calls over the weekend, because that is my time. I value my time with my family and with my friends, and that is the time I dedicate to doing that, because that nurtures me. And until I'm nurturing myself, how am I meant to give back to my clients? How am I meant to give back to my work? And the other example of a boundary might very well be that I'm not going to accept people speaking to me in a manner that I think bumps up against a value of respect. And I've had this instance before where I was at work and I had a gentleman call, and he was irate about something, and I remember kind of being on the phone to him thinking, oh, what do I do here? I'd only just started working. I was still quite young at the time, and I had said to him, I'm really sorry, but if you continue to shout at me, I'm going to put the phone down. Because I can't have a conversation with you if you're yelling at me. And it was making him even more angry, because he wanted to be heard. And I said, look, I'm happy to hear you, but if you continue to speak to me in this manner, which he continued to do, I'm going to hang up. You can call back when you've calmed down, and I will be happy to help you and happy to speak to you, but I will not speak to you if you're shouting at me. Anyway, needless to say, I hung up, and I'm guessing he wasn't very happy about that. But it gave him the time then to go away and calm down and go, okay, well, I'm not going to have my problem solved in this manner. Oh dear. First it's a dog, now it's phone. And it's finding that center, right? So a lot of us don't want to set boundaries because we're so afraid and we don't even know how. And I think the first step really is about finding out, well, where is your limit? What is it that you can identify that makes you feel uncomfortable? What is it that somebody does? What value is somebody bumping up against? And where does that boundary need to be set? And how will you communicate that, right? So it's not about being rude to somebody. It is about being respectful to yourself and respectful to the other person and saying, well, actually, I need to set this boundary because of these. And you don't even need to give it because. It is just that way. Like, I remember my team would complain to me, oh, we're working really late and blah, 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 blah. And I said to them, look, start as you mean to go on. If you are unhappy with working hours that you are doing, then you need to communicate that. And those hours then need to be the exception, not the norm. So obviously there has to be some flexibility there, right? And some boundaries are absolutely rigid. I will not have anyone shouting at me, that's it, finished. That's a rigid boundary for me. But some boundaries tend to be a bit flexible, right? I say I'm not going to take work calls at the weekends or very late in the evening. Okay, but there's an exception to that, right? The exception is the flexibility of saying, well, actually, if there's a project that needs delivering, then I will do those things. And it's the same with my team, right? So guys, where is that flexibility? What is a flexible boundary and what is an absolute fixed boundary? And you have to identify that. And you have to communicate it. And communicate it with respect and, in fact, with love. To say, I have to set this boundary for me, to take care of myself. So I can give more to the world and more to you and more to my team and be the best leader that I can be. So yes, hopefully this is very helpful in clarifying boundaries and how to identify where your boundary is and hopefully be able to communicate them. Until next time.